Welcome students. Today I will be talking about fish migration. What are the reasons for the fish to migrate and what is the course that a fish takes during the course of its migration. Fish migration is a very important behavior which has been extensively studied among animals. Fish is an animal which lives in a water, has got fins, has got scales and has got a streamlined body. It respires through gills. Fish are of different types, the marine fishes and the freshwater fishes. The migration in fishes is an extensively studied behavior, and the different species of fishes that show the phenomenon of migration are the European eel, Angula angula, three stickleback fish, tunas, herring, hilsa, cords, etc. Different types of migration found in case of fishes are: number one is elemental migration, which is based on the search of feed; climatic migration, which is based on the change in the season and therefore the temperature of the waters; gametic migration, which is based on in search of the favorable breeding grounds; climatal migration, which is based on the change in the seasons; and last of all the osmoregulatory migration, which is based on the change in the osmotic potential of the environment. A fish may migrate in one of the following ways. Number one is the drifting, that is, a fish gets drifted along with the water currents, thus it is in a particular direction. Second is random swimming, that is, a fish actually requires the dispersal so that it could avoid the competition for food, mate and space, and this type of migration is directionless. Oriented swimming, when a fish migrates in a particular direction, that means it knows the place where it has to reach. Either the migration can be in the source of the stimulation, that is towards the source of stimulation, or it can be away from the source of stimulation, which have the definitions called phototaxis, chemotaxis or rheotaxis, that is either towards the light or away from the light; chemotaxis towards the chemical or away from the chemical; rheotaxis, that is towards the current or away from the current. And an animal called fish can migrate at an angle of an external cue, that is the magnetic field of earth, sun's rays or the ray from some heavenly body called constellation or a star. What is the periodicity of migration found in fishes? Fishes can show daily migrations. A fish may migrate once in a month, once in a year, biannual, or after a very long span of time. Thus, Pacific salmon can remain in a sea for several years, after which they migrate to a favorable area where they can spawn. Larvae of petromyzon have been seen to spend several years in mud in freshwater before they return to the marine environment after the metamorphosis. The angula, that is European eel, has been shown to remain in seas in freshwater for 20 years before they migrate towards the sea for the purpose of spawning. What is the distance, speed and duration of migration? This varies according to the environment in which the fish is traveling during the course of migration. It depends upon the density of the water, it depends upon the salinity, it depends upon the temperature, it also depends upon whether the fish has to feed during the course of migration. Salmon, tuna and eels have been known to take very long migrations, that is, they can travel to thousands of kilometers during the course of migration in search of a favorable feeding or breeding place. Some fishes which show vertical migrations, that is within the water body, either the fresh or marine. They show short vertical and horizontal migration for feeding or for spawning. Before resting for breeding or spawning or feeding, the fish first assesses or tests whether the area they have selected is worth the migration or not. That is, they will test the salinity, they will test the availability of feed, they will test whether there are predators available or not before resting there for either breeding or for feeding. What are the different patterns of migration or types of migration? Mayer has suggested following names depending upon the migration a fish shows. Number one is Diendromous migration. That is a migration where a fish which is living in sea will migrate towards the fresh water and vice versa. This type of migration is Diadromous migration. It is further divided into two types. One is Anadromous, second is Catadromous migration. Anadromous migration is a migration where a fish which spends large amount of time in sea for feeding and growth and migrates towards fresh water for the purpose of spawning, that is laying eggs. This type of migration is seen in case of salmon, shad, lamprey and hilsa. Catadromous migration is the type of migration wherein a fish which is living in fresh water, feeding and growing there, but migrates to sea for the purpose of spawning, that is laying eggs. This type of migration is seen in case of anguilla. Amphidromous migration, wherein a fish can live either in a sea or fresh water and can migrate either to the sea or fresh water, that is the adults can grow and feed in both sea and fresh water and spawn in both sea and fresh water. They are not limited as far as their homing is concerned. Next type is the Potamodromous migration, wherein a fish can migrate within the limits of the fresh water. Its home is that, it feeds and grows there and ultimately spawns there. Example are the common carps and trouts. Potamodromous migration is the migration which we can study in our freshwater habitats. Oceanodromous migration is the next type, wherein the fish shows the migration within the limits of sea. That is, the adults and the young ones are found in the limits of the oceans only, and they show migration within the marine environment. Examples are cods and herrings. Now let us elaborate upon the different types of migration with examples. Number one is the Oceanodromous migration, and the common example is that of the herring, which has been extensively studied. Herring is a fish that belongs to the family Clupidae and is found in North Pacific and the North Atlantic Oceans. It exhibits daily vertical migration within the limits of these oceans. This type of migration is basically for the feeding purpose. As I have illustrated earlier only, in case of herring, the feed is the zooplanktons. By zooplanktons we mean the larvae of the invertebrates and vertebrates and the different insects that live there in the water body. It has been seen that in the midday the herrings are seen at the deeper depths of the oceans, where also the zooplanktons are seen. During the sunset, these herrings, they come to the surface of the water body. Accordingly, zooplanktons have also seen to show the movements. By the midnight, the zooplanktons, they migrate to the bottoms. Same is the case with the herring. And by the sunrise, again zooplanktons come to the surface of water and Same is the case with the herring. This is a vertical migration wherein a fish migrates from the surface of water body to the deeper depths of the water body and vice versa. Herrings are also known to show the spawning migration within the limits of the oceans. They migrate towards the coasts or banks of the oceans for the purpose of spawning, but during this migration they stop feeding on the zooplanktons, and this change in their feeding habit is based on the change in the hormone level in the body. In their digestive system there is the relative change also, which makes them to show less feeding during the purpose of migration. Before starting their migration, they also increase the fat content in the body so that they can survive during the migration. Examples of Oceanodromous migration. This migration is confined to the limits of the fresh water, and there are number of examples from the teleos like Clupidae, catfishes, salmon, trouts and carps. This migration is both for the purpose of feeding and spawning, and this migration is also based upon the population densities of these fishes. Increase in population density will mean increase in the competition for food, space and shelter. Thus, they try to avoid the aggregations and search for the different environment where there is less competition for food, space and shelter. Diadromous migration, as I have already talked about, this migration is the class of migration where the animals from sea migrate towards the fresh water, and the fishes which are from the fresh water migrates towards the sea, but the purpose here is for the breeding, that is for laying eggs, which at a place which is favorable for the young ones to actually grow and survive from the predators. This class of migration requires the fishes to quickly adjust to the osmoregulation, that is quickly adjust to the changing osmotic potential of the water body. Say for example, a freshwater fish which has abundance of water and less of salt in its environment needs to change its osmoregulation to the environment of the sea where there is large amount of salt and less amount of water available. Thus, a euryhaline fish, that is a fish that can quickly adjust its osmoregulation, requires this type of migration or can take this type of migration. Examples of Diendromous migration, that is the fishes which show migration from sea to the fresh water for spawning. Examples are salmon, Oncorhynchus, Hilsa, etc. Salmon and Hilsa are known to show considerable distances during the course of migration. Brown trout, cutthroat trout show a migration, which means that they do not travel long during the course of migration. Examples of Diendromous migration. In this, I will be drawing your attention towards the anguilla, which is an European eel. This eel spends much of its time in the freshwater habitats and migrates towards the sea for the purpose of spawning. The lifespan of this fish shows two types of eels, which are referred to as yellow eels and silver eels. Yellow eels is the phase of the life cycle of an anguilla, which is for the purpose of feeding and growing, while as silver eel is the phase of the life cycle of anguilla, which is for the purpose of spawning. Yellow eels are found both in salt and fresh water, and they vary in length from few millimeters to several feet. During the autumn season, they start their journey towards the West Atlantic and turn silvery and prepare for the migration. At the phase where they start migration, the age of males is around 8 to 10 years and that of females is from 10 to 18 years. That is, they are reproductively mature. The triggering involves number 1, stopping of feeding. Accordingly, there is shrinking of the gut in their case. Their lips turn thicker, the pectoral fins get stronger, and the reproductive organs develop. Developing of reproductive organs also involve the secretion of hormones in them which change their color into yellow. After traveling 3000 to 4000 kilometers westward, they cross Atlantic Ocean, reach the place Bermuda, and they spawn there, they lay their eggs there. They lay their eggs at the depth of 400 to 500 meters at the water temperature of 16 to 70 degrees Celsius. After laying the eggs, the parents die. The eggs hatch into different set of larvas. Number 1 larva is that of leptocephaly larva, which is a small headed larva. The eggs, before hatching, they shed their yolk, they float, come to the surface up to the depth of 50 meters. The larva that hatches out of them is referred to as leptocephalous larva. This larva is a leaf-like larva, transparent, tiny creature, has got needle-like teeth, large eyes, and has got straight alimentary canal, and the skeleton in it is non-ossified, that is, there are no bones present in its skeleton. Thus, my friends, up till now I have talked about the fish migration, what are the different types of migration found in fishes, and what are the different species of fishes that actually show the migration. In case of fishes, migration is primarily for feeding and spawning, but they may show the class of migration based on seasons and based on the osmoregulatory behavior as well. Thank you very much.